Thank you, thank you. It is great to be here. It is great to be upright and walking around and beginning to heal. People have been so considerate and friendly, at least the people I've met in person. If you go online, it's a little bit different. Most of them wish you that you were dead or would retire permanently. It is sort of amazing, though, the difference between people who you see, in person and how they treat you. And I think most of us treat each other pretty well, whether we're the same party, whether we agree on every issue or not. But online, just the hatred. And then you turn the television on and they say, whose fault it is? It's all Donald Trump's fault. And it's like, look, I don't agree with everything the president tweets out, but I don't think he's the one stoking the anger. I see the anger all over the place. I mean, literally, we announced that I had pretty significant surgery to remove a portion of my lung that was taken from an attack from a guy who hated the president, who was tweeting out stuff like, we should fry the president's gonads. That's who the guy was that attacked me. The media reports, it was just a yard altercation. Well, it's not an altercation when you're bending over to pick up something with noise-canceling headphones on and someone hits you in the back. That's not an altercation. I was just assaulted. If it had happened to Joe Scarborough walking down New York, you think they would think it's funny? Their network thought it was funny. One of their reporters said, it was the funniest story last year. And it's like, really? The 4 months I lay in bed wasn't very funny, 2 years later, having part of my lung resected wasn't that funny. But people from Kentucky have been different, and people I think are, I think we're better than that. I think we're better than all the mob on the internet. But really, the media gets that there's anger in our country. They get that there's violence in our country, but they only point in one direction. Everything is Donald Trump's fault. And I think it isn't making it any better. It's just dividing us further into different camps saying, well, if that's all they're going to say, maybe I'm just not going to watch their network anymore. So we've sort of gone our separate ways, and people are like, well, they're just not telling the truth anymore. And frankly, I think there is some of that. What are the facts? How do we figure out anymore even what's true? But I do think that amidst some of the problems we have, and I'm not saying we don't have problems, there's also a lot of good news. And good news doesn't really sell. So for most media, they're always promoting either that we hate each other, there's tension. Really in Washington, when I walk the corridors or I talk to people on the floor who are Democrats, I have 5, 10, 15 of them I talk to every day. We're on very friendly terms. I've never had a harsh word. I might have had more harsh words in my own caucus because I expect more from them, but on the other side, we get along. We know that we disagree on a lot of issues, and we try to find the small group of issues we agree on, and I have bills with, half a dozen Democrats. And so really, there isn't so much anger in Washington as the media makes it out. They say, there's lack of civility. Well, I think it's the media reporting bad news, reporting how angry we're supposed to be with each other, and so then people go online and they get even worse and worse when it's anonymous. The problem we have, though, is in a country of 330 million people, if we're stoking this anonymous anger, eventually there is going to be someone who is a sociopath. Someone is a mass murdering, crazed person. They're out there. They're probably in almost every community, and fortunately they don't always act on it. But I think stoking this, I think we could do better as a society if we somehow calmed it down some. And that's really on both sides. I mean, both right and left. But I think it's a mistake to say, it's all just Republicans' fault or it's all just the right wing's fault. In fact, when I look at it from my perspective and I see Senator McConnell, breaks his shoulder and people are standing in his front yard wishing they could stab him with a needle in the heart and kill him, and it's like, he then puts it on Twitter, and you know what Twitter does? Twitter then bans McConnell from Twitter for putting up that there are protesters in his yard saying they wish they could kill him. And it's like, really, aren't we better than this? And it's a little harder, I think, and, I always say I'm coming to God's country when I come down here. God may not be always in certain parts of Louisville, and so they may not quite get it. But, they're just bad people. And frankly, if bad people are shouting all night on the street, as much as I'm for, freedom of discourse and this and that, I don't think you should be allowed to keep the neighbors up. If a teenager's having a party, the police come and shut it down. Why should people be allowed to stand in front of someone's house and yell and scream all night long, particularly profanities and actually implied violence? I'm not saying we put them away forever, but we should clear the street from them every night, I think. And they shouldn't be allowed to do it. But really, we as a society should just figure out, what we want. But when we look at everything and we say, are things bad or good? I tell people, and I've started saying and beginning speeches this way, is that there's never been a better time to be alive. Never, ever been a better time to be alive. There's some statistics out there that are just overwhelming, and I'll give you a couple of them. Lifespan. Just since 1900, we have doubled the global lifespan. It was really in the 30s back in 1900, 35 years of age. It's now over 70 for the world, not just us. For us, it's closer to 80, but for the world, it's over 70. So we've doubled the lifespan in the last 100 years. Childhood mortality, before the age of 5, a third of kids used to die before the age of 5. 1 in 100 women died in childbirth. All of those numbers have just plummeted. If you look at economic growth, there's a chart, and it's an amazing chart. They do it, I don't know how they do it, but they try to approximate it through generation after generation for the whole world. And you go back almost to the time of Jesus, and you go along, and you're along the x-axis. It's like zero economic growth. You get to 1800, and then you get to the Industrial Revolution, and you get to sort of the dawn and the advent of international trade and capitalism and division of labor, where people start specializing in their jobs. And the curve is like this. It's through the roof. World gross domestic product, what the world makes, has gone up 100-fold since 1800. And so then people like Bernie say, oh no, but only the rich are getting it. Just the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It's just absolutely and unequivocally false. Every fact shows you that it's false. Everything you look at says the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting richer. The poor in our country approximate the rich in other countries now. I mean, our country is doing amazingly well. 100-fold increase in our world domestic product. The other side wants you to say that if you get rich or you succeed, that somehow you're taking it from someone else, that the economic pie is fixed, and if you get more, someone gets less. The facts are absolutely the opposite. The facts are absolutely that economic growth is going through the roof. And you say, well, what about the poor? What about the really poor? Well, they measure extreme poverty. This is living on less than $2 a day. In 1800, 90% of the world lived that way. I mean, the only people that had any wealth were kings and queens and royalty and the very fabulously wealthy, and everybody was poor. 90% lived on less than $2 a day, keeping the dollars constant. When I was born in the early 1960s, it had gone from 90% living in extreme poverty to a third. You go from the early 1960s to today, it's less than 10%. I'm not just talking about our country. I'm talking about the world, including Bangladesh, including India, including all of Africa. The overall extreme poverty in the world is less than 10%. These are facts. The people, telling you how dire it is and how it's a shrinking pie and just the rich are getting richer are just being dishonest with you. But if you accept the fact that the world is growing, the economy is growing, and everybody's getting richer, we have to understand why. And I think that's sort of the question and the message everybody has to get to. The president ran on this message of Make America Greater. And I said, or Make America Great Again. And I guess my response always was, well, in order to make it great again, you got to know what made us great in the first place. It's the same answer you have to this world growth product that's doing this and going through the roof. How did it happen? Why did it happen? And I think the answer is very clear. The answer is that when you leave people alone, if you're a plumber, a doctor, an accountant, or you make widgets, or you chop wood, or whatever you do that you sell to your neighbor, if you do a good job, if the government doesn't get in between what you make and what you sell and who buys it, people thrive. And that's capitalism. The other big thing that was a big step from capitalism was also trade. And that's trading with the world. So not only did we specialize, each of us, in our own special occupation, the world specialized. Like, we don't make flip-flops anymore. They make them in Vietnam for probably 20 cents, and we probably buy them for $1.50 or whatever. And you can say, well, we should make them here, but in some ways we've specialized and we're making other things that we once made here. Trade, division of labor, and the freedom to sell your services or sell your products. That's why we got rich. And you say, well, it's so obvious, why do we even have to bring it up? Because the other side is now saying socialism is the way to go. I just finished reading a book, and in there they talked about the famines of the 20th century. The major famines of the 20th century, 70 million people died. Of those famines, 80% of them were under socialism, collective ownership of the farmland by the government, and outright communism or Nazism, by big government taking over things. That's when you have famine. There's a quote by one economist named Radelet, and I enjoyed it. They said the one most dramatic thing that happened that Mao did that actually changed the trajectory of poverty worldwide was when he died. Because he was so awful what he did to China tens of millions of people died from famine because he took all the land from people. And he said, it's no longer your land, it's the collective's land. You get whatever the collective will give you. It isn't how hard you work, it's you're going to get an equal portion of this. It didn't work. Communism didn't work. Socialism didn't work, and yet we have people now running for office saying, oh, socialism's the way to go. You know, if we have the government own these businesses, it'll be just a great thing to happen. But here's the interesting thing. What they're offering you is, well, we're not really for Mao's China. We're not really for, Stalin's Russia or Hitler's Nazism. What we're really for is Scandinavian socialism. So Bernie, Biden, the Clintons, they all love Scandinavian socialism. But you have to realize there's a big lie, and this is the big lie they're not telling you. Number one, Scandinavia isn't really socialist. Most of the businesses are owned privately. For the last 30 years, their taxes have been coming down, not up. Their corporate tax has been less than ours for the last 40 years. They have free trade with the world. And you say, well, don't they have a lot of free stuff? Yep, they've got government free stuff. They have an enormous welfare state. But what does Bernie say? And what does Elizabeth Warren say? He says, we will give you all this free stuff. You can have free college. You can have free paid leave. You can have everything for free, but we're just going to tax the top 1%. That's the lie. If you tax the top 1%, 100% of everything they earn, there isn't enough money to pay for all of this. So when you look to Scandinavia, and they do have a lot of free stuff, it's a big welfare state over there. All the countries have big welfare. But when you look to those states and you say, well, who pays the taxes? The poor and the middle class pay way more taxes over there than they do here. The income tax is 60%, starting at $60,000 in Denmark. If you want to buy a car, it's a 200% tax on the car. So you want to buy a $30,000 car, you got to come up with $60,000 before you go down to get the $30,000 car. You got to have $90,000 to buy a $30,000 car. So nobody has a car. If you look at their sales tax, they have a 25% sales tax throughout Scandinavia. Sales tax is what they call a regressive tax. Rich and the poor pay the same thing, 25% on food, medicine, everything. So you can be Sweden, you can have Scandinavia, you can have Denmark, but it's not free. And you can't do it by just having the rich pay for it. You will pay for it. We will all pay for it. So that's the decision we need to make, is not that we accept this big lie. We accept, if you want free stuff, if you think the government should be giving you all this free stuff, yes, you can have it, but you will pay for it. You can't have the rich pay for it. I'll give you an example. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she says she wants a 70% tax on those making more than $10 million. It brings in $50 billion. You say, well, that sounds like a lot of money. Well, how much do they want to spend? Somewhere between 60 and 90 trillion dollars. There's a math problem here. Bring in $50 billion in taxes and spend $90 trillion. The other problem I think we need to face is we have some problems in our country with spending more money than comes in. We had it under Democrats, we got it under Republicans. It's easy just to keep spending money because everybody wants it, but we have more wants than we have money. So about $1 trillion a year annual deficit. The problem is as this deficit mounts and gets bigger and bigger, it puts pressure on the rest of things. And so we do have to figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to be able to pay for these things. Medicare, whether you're Republican or Democrat, most people accept Medicare, and it just is, and they kind of want it to continue. Medicare that we have, which I call Medicare for some, that's for those who are 65 and over for the most part, is $35 trillion short. We are not paying enough taxes to pay for the people currently on Medicare. We're $35 trillion short. Could we fix it? Yes, probably. But you can't just say we're going to give it to everyone. It costs $60 trillion more if you want to have Medicare for all. And then here's the other rub. 180 million people in our country have insurance through their business, and the healthcare is not perfect. Boy, let me tell you, I'm a consumer of it and have practiced it. Healthcare is not perfect. We hate our insurance company half the time. We're fighting with them half the time. All of us are, and yet, if you tell me you can have it through your employer, or you work for Toyota or General Motors, you can have insurance through that or through the city, or would you rather have Medicaid? I think most people would rather have their current insurance through their employer rather than be put on Medicaid or put on a government insurance program. There's also just not enough money for it. So we can do all of that, but this is an incredibly dramatic thing to banish and forbid people from having private insurance. But that's what the Medicare for All proposal is. I think one of the things we ought to look at, and I'll end with this and we'll see if there's any questions, is that as we try to figure out how we can treat each other better, have less violence, and try to get along and at least hear each other out on things, we have to kind of figure out what we think the job of our representatives is. So there have been times during the Kavanaugh hearings when it was just completely crazy in Washington, people yelling, screaming profanities, just awful behavior. I mean, rushing into elevators and yelling and screaming and calling you a rapist if you were going to vote for the Republican nominee for the Supreme Court. I mean, just really over-the-top craziness. It was sad. I couldn't even walk to the Capitol. I was having to have a car come to the curb, and I would go from the door to the curb and get in the car so I wouldn't be yelled at and harassed to walk 200 yards to the Capitol. It was awful. But some of these people were yelling, "Do your job," and you'd see them sometimes in the airport or in restaurants, and they'd come up and they'd yell, "Do your job, do your job." And I think that's fine, but we have to figure out what job we want from our representatives. And I guess to me, the way I look at the job is this. I believe that you have God-given rights. They're yours. They're inherently yours. Some of them are listed. Some important ones are listed. The freedom to worship, the freedom to associate with who you want, the freedom to speak, the freedom to practice your religion any way you want, the freedom to own a gun. These are basic things that are in the Bill of Rights. I think our job is not always to say, I'm going to pass legislation for you and you and you. I think maybe our job is to defend liberty. You know, Goldwater said, if I'm accused of neglecting my constituents' interests, I will tell them that I was informed that chief among their interests was liberty. And in that vein, I'm doing what I can to defend your liberty. So I think right now, in times of divided government, people are sometimes unhappy and they're like, why can't you pass legislation? Why can't you do this or that? Well, maybe part of the job isn't always passing legislation, but defending your liberty against bad legislation, against a government that goes too far in one direction or not. And so we have a Democrat House and a Republican Senate. People say, well, nothing will get done. Sometimes nothing is better than something. And if nothing means defending the status quo, which is the Bill of Rights, maybe we're better off not getting brand new legislation all the time, but trying to defend what our founding fathers thought was important, and I think many of you do, and that's that our rights come from God and are worth defending. Thank you very much.
If you need assistance with federal agencies, please contact our Bowling Green office or visit our website.